This is Unrendered on IKTV. I am Tony Regisford, and my guest is Trish Sintil, a Vincentian writer and publisher residing in the United States of America. Trish, when we went in the break, I left you with the question about your mission here in St. Vincent. You are on a Garifuna mission. What exactly is it?
Well, the mission, I think, for me, is that I want to make sure that children in St. Vincent understand their history better than I understood mine. That they're not brought up with the same ignorance. I look at people in my family and in other families around me, and there are a certain age where you don't even know if you want to waste your time because you're not going to change them. And you can't really blame them. They were brought up thinking a certain way and thinking here in certain negative things about Carib people and wanting to do nothing with it. Like, don't want any part of it. It's all negative, you know, this, that, they're no good, you know. And so I want to change that for the young people. And I think I've started to do that.
Good.
And so for me, let them understand who they are. They could choose whether they really want to embrace being Garifuna or not. If they want to say I'm a Garifuna or I have Garifuna roots or, you know, I don't want any part of it. But let them do it with knowledge.
Yes.
Let them not be...
So you need to give them the exposure.
Right, the exposure. I had a young child, I taught the history, for instance, this year. We introduced the history into the workshop because I realized that we're teaching all this stuff at Garifuna Cultural Retrieval. How is that really helpful if they don't really understand the history?
Yes.
So I introduced the history, and so what Ms. Vernon and I would do, Christine Vernon is our language director, James Lovell is the musical director, I'm the executive director.
Right.
And I would teach them a history class. So she will do one language class, and then they'll come into my class, and then she'll do the second language class, and when she's done, I'll do the second history class. And several children said things to me that it was a little troubling. One child said to me, you know, my teacher told me there is no Chatouillet. Joseph Chatouillet was not a Vincentian because there are no Chatouillets in St. Vincent.
Okay.
So I had to say to the young man, knowing who Joseph Chatouillet was, how much he was despised because of his standing up to the British and the Europeans, frankly speaking, do you think if there are Chatouillets left in St. Vincent, they would have said they were Chatouillets? Another child said to me, Carib people have flat nose and good hair. Right. And I said, what's your hair? Is that bad hair? And so you hear children say this. And so you have to be careful how you give them the information. But you realize there's a lot of misinformation. Yes. Even by people here in Vincentian society that are intelligent people and mean well. They don't understand their history.
Well, of course, it is also about the standard bearer that they use to define what normal or beautiful is or what have you. So it's this Eurocentric values. So a flat nose, of course, is not Eurocentric.
Right.
So that's something bad. And good hair, as they term it, is something that more resembles the texture of the European hair. So I guess it's that whole brainwashing and all the scourges that came with our deculturization and the passage of slavery. Those are the issues that spill out into the social fabric today.
And it's kind of sad because St. Vincent had one of the shortest history of slavery. But yet, look at the damage, that short span of slavery. When I say slavery, I mean deep colonization where you have like huge slave plantation. The Europeans were always here with their pockets of slaves. Yes. But where you had like huge slave plantations.
Not as bad as Jamaica,
not like Jamaica and these other places. Yet look at the damage just
for that short period.
Just that short period. Look at the damage that did. And I've always said this. The Garifuna is the missing link between formerly enslaved Africans and Africans living in Africa. Right. This is what they would have looked like had they come to these parts and lived as free people. Yes. If all black people came out here and lived as free people, as immigrants or what have you, yes. This is what they would have resembled. Because the Garifunas were not slaves. Now, that does not mean that we don't have a slavery connection, meaning there were people running up from the plantations, yes. or houses to join the Free Garifuna. The slaves coming in from Barbados and places like that and joining the Caribs. So we're certainly not going to sit here and try to act like we have absolutely no attachment or connection with the formerly enslaved Africans and who is, don't embrace it. No, I certainly embrace it. It's a part of us, whether we want to accept it or not. But we do, as once the formerly enslaved Africans joined the Caribs or joined the Garifunas, they lived as free people. And so they were not people who were living in fear of being captured and taken back to a plantation.
Yes. So in your workshops, you were concentrating on, you said you added a history element this time. This is the 4th year you're doing it, yes? So you added a history element this time. But your main focus is language, music, dance,
drumming, cooking.
So you do the cuisine too,
and even some of the
way you dress.
Yeah, the fashions. We introduce some fashions.
Right. How has that been in terms of your reach? What's the size of your workshop, and what has been the impact?
We've had up to 150 children. This year we had over 130, 135, and at one point we had to kind of scale it back slightly because it became like really out of control, of where some of the children who were not necessarily playing a direct part, they were just sitting around talking, distracting. So we said, okay, you've been here 2 weeks, you're not taking a part. The 3rd week, you don't have to come in that 3rd week, but we will still send transportation to get you to bring you to the workshop, and you will still get your certificate. I think it is starting to make a big difference. The children know a lot more about their history because of this workshop. They know the basic conversational Garifuna. They understand the foods, and they love the food that we introduce. We introduce, for instance,
some of these foods were.
One is called hudutu, or we say hudut. Hudut is very simple. You make a fish soup with coconut milk and fish. You fry the fish. You don't flour it.
Right.
You just fry it, and then you add it to coconut milk, and you add seasoning. And you take plantains. You boil, mostly green, but some ripe.
Right.
For every 3 or so plantain that you pound, you put a ripe one to it. In between, and you use what we call a mata and piso, and in Central America they call it a hana. Yes. And you have the big stick, and we pound it. Yes. And we make a little fufu like, and we put it in like aluminum foil. In the old days, it might have been something like
maybe a fig leaf.
Fig leaf. Yeah. And so that's one dish. The other one is something we call bundiga, which my mother actually made when I introduced her to it. She remembered it. This is where it's a version of banana dumpling, but there's no flour added. You grate the banana, you put a little seasoning, and you boil some coconut milk, really hot. Make sure it's boiling hot. And then you take a spoon, you just flip these little banana, grated up banana into the hot milk. Don't stir it, or otherwise it's going to become very soupy. Right. And that one is called bundiga. There's another one where you make you grate banana, and you season it, and you make it in either fig leaf or aluminum foil, and you could do that with like stewed chicken. That's called darasa. Okay. So those are some of the ones that.
Where do you get these from, though? You from your research, people mainly in the Garifuna, mainly in Honduras, they've kept that culture alive in Central America.
In Central America.
That's where you're pulling all these.
Yeah, I hang with both Belizean Garifuna and Honduran Garifunas, and I've gotten a sense of how the two dishes, the hudut, for instance, might have a slight different variation between Belizeans and Hondurans. The Hondurans will put conch and shrimp in addition to the whatever. So and, some people from Belize, they put a little pigtail in there sometimes. So I actually have them teach me. I'll come to your house, I'll give you the money to buy the stuff and show me how to make it. And so I'm able to bring it here.
Are you familiar with something called ruku?
I've heard of it. I haven't made it actually. Okay. I've heard people say it. Right. But
well, I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with it. When I was growing up, it was like a pod that I know it made things red. That was it was like a dye.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
And I'm sure that was something that the Garifuna used.
A lot of one of the things about the beautiful thing is that, as far as what survived. If nothing else survived in St. Vincent for Garifuna, the food did. Our cassava pone, our potato pudding, our Madame Good dumpling, our chichi cake, our, our love of banana and fish, and putting, my mother, for instance, put coconut milk in everything that she makes. These are all things that we got from the Garifuna culture, and we don't realize it, but that's where we got it from.
And of course, as you said, there's a lot of African influence as well. So it's that mix. You talk about the mortar and pestle. I'm sure that's an African thing as well.
Right. And also, just the word Garifuna.
Yes.
One of the explanations I've heard as far as what that means, Gari, cassava. Garifuna, cassava, eating people.
Okay.
That's an African thing.
Right.
So the interesting thing with the Garifuna is this. The Garifuna is a beautiful blend of African skin, African culture, blended with the native Indian culture.
Caribbeans. Yes.
Right. And if you look at the dances, for instance, the punta, that's an African one. You know, it's kind of, you dance and you move your waist, and it's a festive dance. You have the one that's the hugu hugu, and it's kind of a ceremonial dance, and they're doing a kind of shuffle. And the chumba. Then there's the African war dance, the wanaragua, where they really almost go like that on their feet, and you see the men, that's mainly a male dance. So it's a beautiful blending. The hugu hugu, that's more of a native Indian dance, okay, or something the Carib or Arawak. The language is mainly an Arawakan language, okay. There are a little sprinkling of words. I think they've identified 16 words from Africa, so there's not a lot of African words in the Garifuna language. There's some French, and of course, over the years, they've introduced some Spanish words and English, but it's primarily a Arawak language.
You were saying to me off camera that this is a language, not a dialect.
It is not a dialect. And people always, and I do have some issue with this, where if a language is not European, it's a dialect. And I take great offense to that.
You should.
Garifuna has its own structure, counting system, days of the week, months of the year, alphabet, the whole structure. And the thing with the Garifuna language, it is such a beautiful language. You know, when you hear it, even before I could speak it, or speak any of it, the Hondurans, for instance, speak Spanish and Garifuna. The Belizean, English, and Garifuna. I have never mixed up Spanish and Garifuna. There's a distinct tone, a distinct way when they speak it, that is not of Spanish. In St. Vincent, I think why the Garifuna, this black group, held so heavily to the native Indian piece of them is because, as I said earlier, the Europeans were bringing their pockets of slaves. This group of Africans did not want in any way to be mistaken, for slaves.
Right.
They would practice things like flattening their heads the way the Caribs did.
Right.
The language, like I said, is Arawak language.
So they kept that alive.
Right, because the whole thing with the Garifuna, St. Vincent Carib have Arawak mixture in them as well, because the Arawaks were the first ones up in these parts, and then the Caribs came up, destroyed the men, took the wives as their own. And so the children, when they first started to speak, would speak the Arawak tongue, because Mama Arawak would be teaching that child how to speak. The African come, they joined, and so the children are still speaking. Mama Arawak, who that African man is now married, is speaking Arawak. And then when it's later on, he goes out to fish or hunt with Dad, the Carib man. He would teach her the Carib tongue. So that's why if you know about Garifuna, and I'm no expert to Garifuna.
Fair enough.
There's a little Carib tongue to it as well. When you're talking about something that's male, there's a different way that you will say something when it relates to something male than female. So there's a part of it that's considered a Carib tongue and a part of the Arawak tongue. But the overall language is predominantly an Arawak language.
Right. Well, you seem to have done your research quite well. I mean, I'm tossing back now 13 years when you didn't have a clue. That you are in fact something else other than just Trish. And how you knew yourself to be. So this is quite impressive. We're at the end of our third segment. When I come back, I want to touch again on the elements of stuff that you're doing here. I remember looking at the television last week and seeing a group of children from your workshop singing the national anthem in the Garifuna language. And I know that it's part of your group handiwork. Let's explore a bit more when we come back.
Yes.
This is Unrendered on IKTV. More with Trish Sintil when we come back from the break.